Hi, everybody. Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick, and greetings to all of you listening from places like Rochester, New York, Jupiter, Florida, Madison, Wisconsin, Wellington, New Zealand, Ris-Oranges, France, and Grantham, Lincolnshire, England. Thanks for joining me, and today's show is going to be a little bit unconventional. It's part travelogue and part interview. So let me explain. The week after the Pebble Beach Concours, I had the pleasure of taking part in a vintage Mercedes Benz automobile tour in Northern California. And the cars in question were amazing W.06 cars. That's the factory designation. But basically, these are the Mercedes Benz S, SS, and SSK cars from the 20s and 30s. Something like 300 were built in total, and of those, just a fraction remain, really. So it was essentially a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be around these cars on the road in all their glory. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how that all came together. But in the meantime, I want to say thanks for supporting the podcast. If you haven't done so yet, make sure to follow Horsepower Heritage on whatever app you're using. And if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, do me a favor, leave me 5 stars and a quick review. It really does help new listeners discover the show. And we're growing every week, and I can't do it without you. All right, one more thing I've got to let you know before we get started. This Friday, September 22nd, I've got a special episode coming out. So you got a twofer this week. We're going to be talking with the founders of The Bridge, which is a concours event on Long Island, New York, at the former site of the Bridgehampton Race Circuit, which was an incredibly important track in the United States. So that's this Friday. By the way, today's episode is episode number 99. Friday's episode is a special. It doesn't count as episode 100, which is a milestone for me, and I'm really excited about that. But that's going to be in 2 weeks, and I have a very special guest for episode 100. I'm not going to tell you who it is right now, but trust me, it's fantastic. You won't want to miss it. All right, stay with me because I've got supercharged pre-war Mercedes-Benz cars on tour in California's wine country, and that's coming up right after this. This episode of Horsepower Heritage is sponsored by Model Citizen Diecast. No matter what's in your garage, you can fit all your automotive heroes on a shelf. And they've got you covered, whether it's 1/43rd scale, 1/18th scale, or even the ginormous 1/8 scale masterpieces from the Amalgam Collection. Go to ModelCitizenDiecast.com and get 10% off when you use the promo code HERITAGE at checkout. Limitations apply. From race cars to street cars and everything in between, it's Model Citizen Diecast, because your inner child still wants to play with cars. At this year's Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance, one of the featured classes was the Mercedes Benz S series of cars of the late 20s and early 30s. Designated by the factory as W06, W for Wagen, about 300 of them were built between 1927 and 1933, and 18 of them were on display at Pebble Beach. Now, many of them were flown in from Europe to attend, and of course that presented a great opportunity for their owners to organize a driving tour the week following the Pebble Beach Concours. Now, as for my involvement, my phone rang last April, and on the line was my friend Royce Rumsey. He's a photographer and a retired industrial designer, and he does a lot of work for Mercedes. And Royce is a terrific guy, by the way. He's been on the program. Anyway, he's had the privilege of photographing some of the world's rarest and most desirable cars, not just Mercedes-Benz, but many others. And he wanted to know if I'd like to join him on the W06 tour. The tour would take us through the twisting back roads of California's wine country, Sonoma and Napa counties, over hill and dale, past vineyards and barns, sometimes on dirt roads, through the fog and the mist in the morning and blistering sun in the afternoon. It was an impressive itinerary for a bunch of 90-year-old cars worth millions of dollars apiece. So, of course, immediately I told Royce to count me in, and my job would be to drive the chase car while Royce got the shot with his camera. In terms of sporting automobiles, the Mercedes-Benz Type W06 cars rank among the finest machines of the early 20th century. And they were once the fastest production cars in the world, starting at 6.8 liters and eventually making it to over 7 liters of displacement. Their inline 6-cylinder engines were designed with racing in mind. with overhead valves and a single overhead cam driven by a vertical shaft with a bevel gear on top. And they were supercharged with a Roots-type blower that can be engaged or disengaged by way of a mechanical linkage. And basically, you mash the throttle and the supercharger kicks in, which is advantageous because running it all the time doesn't really help you unless it's really giving you a boost, right? And this is where Mercedes got famous for the compressor cars, which is a label they still use today. The W06 was built on a 133-inch wheelbase chassis, and they've got stainless steel exhaust runners that snake out from the right-hand side of a long hood, and that tells you right there's a lot of power lurking beneath that bodywork. The S, or Sport model, was followed by the Super Sport, or SS, and then the SSK, the K being for Kurz, or short in German, because although these cars had blistering straight-line performance, that 133-inch wheelbase did them really no favors in the curves, especially on European hill climbs and twisty mountain roads. So on the SSK, they shortened the wheelbase to 116 inches, and that solved the problem, and I believe they built 30 of those cars. And of course, not all of them survive today. The W06 was racing in all sorts of competitions, from Grand Prix to hill climbs, like I mentioned, and also punishing long-distance events. In fact, the Eiffel 1,000-kilometer race was very important to this car's history. One of the era's greatest racing drivers, Rudi Caricciolo, won the very first race at the Nürburgring in the S model. That was the first year that the Eiffel 1000 was held on a closed course. And then Caricciolo had a long string of victories over the next few years in the W06. It was an astonishing machine, and no less astonishing was the fact that it existed at all. Because after World War I, Germany was a society in crisis, with runaway inflation and terrible turmoil among the various political factions. By 1923, the Daimler Motors Corporation, which was founded in 1890 by Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach, was in serious trouble. Their Mercedes brand of motor cars had been popular, but the company saw orders fall dramatically as prices ran out of control. Inflation meant that by 1921 or so, a Mercedes cost over 25 million marks. The output of their factories in Stuttgart and Berlin slowed to a crawl. The same was true in the city of Mannheim, the home of Benz & Company. Carl Benz was 79 years old in 1923. And as the father of the motor car, it was inconceivable that he might outlive the company to which he had devoted his entire life. But that was a real possibility at the time. So, in the summer of 1926, Daimler and Benz agreed to a merger. And by the time the deal was done, Germany had actually begun to enjoy a period of economic recovery and at least some political stability. And Daimler had a couple aces up its sleeve. The first was called the Mercedes Benz Model K. It was the sporting version of an existing luxury chassis, again with a supercharged engine. And it was developed just as the Daimler-Benz merger was about to take place. Now, the second ace was Daimler's 51-year-old technical director, and his name was Ferdinand Porsche. Porsche came in the door to replace Gottlieb Daimler's son Paul, who'd resigned following a disagreement with the board of directors. Porsche continued to refine the already superb work that Paul Daimler had done, and in 1927, the W06 was born. So as you can see, these cars represent a watershed moment for the Mercedes brand. They're the result of Germany's best automotive engineering and design work in the decade after the Great War. Incidentally, as prominent as both men were in German industry, Carl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler never actually met. Benz said that he'd once seen Daimler across a crowded room, but by the time he'd made his way in that direction, Daimler had disappeared. Now, Daimler had a weak heart, and he died in 1900, but his company continued to grow. It was a powerhouse of German industry. So now that you've got the historical background, let me tell you about the tour. The Monday following the Pebble Beach Concours, all the cars departed Pebble Beach Lodge and headed north along the coast, and then we turned into the mountains above the city of Santa Cruz. As we climbed through the redwoods and into the clouds, wind-blown rain and mists were tumbling across the narrow 2-lane road. We'd left 80-degree weather at sea level, and in just about 45 minutes or so, it was blustery and cold. Really amazing change of climate. Once we got to the top, we stopped at Alice's restaurant. It was made famous by the Arlo Guthrie song in the 60s. We gassed up there, and then we dropped down the leeward side of the peaks and into the busy South Bay suburbs, eventually picking up the 280 freeway and making our way north into San Francisco. It was impossible to keep all the cars together in the crazy traffic of the city, and everybody kind of broke up, but eventually we crossed the Golden Gate Bridge and we turned northeast towards the afternoon's destination, Keller Estate Winery near Petaluma. Now, in case you don't know the name Arturo Keller, he's ranked as the #1 car collector in the world, and you can imagine how hard it is to get to the top of that list. But he has examples of cars that even their manufacturers don't have. And the collection spans the ages. Alfa Romeo Grand Prix cars, original and unrestored Rolls-Royce Silver Ghosts, stately Pierce Aero touring cars, Art Deco Delages from France, and of course, Mercedes Benz automobiles, which is kind of a specialty of Arturo's. The collection consists of cars built in the United States, England, France, Italy, and Germany. Essentially the greatest of the greats. And they're all housed in their own dedicated buildings according to nationality. And no photography is permitted, which drove me crazy, but I understand why. But touring the collection was absolutely overwhelming. We had a limited time to do it, and it's almost like it was a dream now. In fact, I wish I'd sort of taken some notes because it's hard to remember what I actually saw. But I can tell you that it's the kind of place where you wish you had a sleeping bag and you could camp out for a week just to take it all in. It was a wonderful experience. So after lunch and a tour of the collection, we set out for our hotel in Sonoma to get a little rest. And then the next morning, Royce and I blasted out ahead of the cars and we staged on a lonely country road. And then we waited. Farm trucks rumbled past, buzzards circled over our head, and we sort of joked about if they're waiting for us to die. And just about the time we were getting bored, suddenly there they were. The W.06s flying past us with our cameras clicking away. Royce got some amazing shots, as usual, by the way. He's really an incredible photographer. You've got to check him out. I'm going to put a link in the show notes for his Instagram as well as his website. And of course, it'll give you a great idea of the cars I'm talking about. Anyway, back to our story. It was kind of like that all day. On to the next leg, trying to get ahead of the group as best we could. Most of the day, we were out in the middle of nowhere, so we had no cell signal. It was impossible to know when the cars might be coming around the bend and right on top of us again. So we had to be ready at a moment's notice. But when they did appear, it was never a dull moment. The drivers were really making the most of the tour and opening up the throttle at every opportunity. In fact, I kind of felt bad sometimes because we would get ahead of a group and Royce would be out the sunroof taking photos. And you want to do that at about, 32 miles an hour is really the safe speed. Because I wanted to take care of him, right? He's out the sunroof. But on these twisty roads, the drivers just want to open it up and go. But, they were good sports about it. We'd give it a mile, maybe a mile and a half. Royce would get the shots that he needed. And then we would pull off and let him by. And of course, we got thumbs up as they thundered past us. It was really fun. And by the way, when their superchargers kick in, they make a distinctive trumpeting howl. So this is an interesting story. Back in the 20s, the W06 was nicknamed the White Elephant, partly because, like elephants, they're imposing and powerful, but also because the supercharger's howl sounds a bit like an angry elephant, if you can imagine an elephant trumpeting. And since Germany's national racing color was white at the time, the nickname stuck and they became the White Elephant. Now, by modern standards, the weakest part of these cars are their mechanical drum brakes. They work pretty hard to slow such a fast car, and the stopping distance would scare most people out of the driver's seat. Everyone I spoke to said that mastering these cars takes a long time, and the windy roads of Sonoma County probably challenged every driver at least a few times each day. Our lunch stop on day 2 was director Francis Ford Coppola's winery near Geyserville, California. The tasting room there is filled with memorabilia from the film Apocalypse Now, including Colonel Kilgore's Air Mobile surfboard, which was totally cool. And the gift shop displays props from the film Tucker A Man in His Dream, one of my favorites, and there's a 1948 Tucker torpedo in the center of the room. After lunch, we chased the cars back to the hotel, where a team of mechanics from Mercedes Benz Classic got to work on the handful of cars that needed some attention. And honestly, there weren't that many. Several of the mechanics had come from Germany specifically for the tour, and a Sprinter van from the Classic Center in Long Beach, California was well outfitted with tools and spare parts and consumable items. And of course, I'm curious, right? So I'm hanging out with the mechanics, checking out what they're doing. One of the cars had been bogging down under hard acceleration, so they went through the ignition system and checked the spark plugs, and he cleaned the magneto. And another car had some shudder in the front end, which was traced to the knockoff hubs. They found that the threads on the hubs had paint on them, which you don't want. You want that to be bare metal, because it prevents the knockoff nut from biting when it's tightened. So they cleaned all the paint off the threads, and then they hammered the nuts tight, and that car was good to go the rest of the tour. I don't think he had any more trouble. And another car had an oil leak, which I think came from a relief valve, but it was engine oil, and he dumped about 1.5 quarts on the ground in the parking lot. But they cleaned it up quickly, and then they sorted out the problem. And that was pretty much it in terms of the mechanical problems. Out of 18 cars, almost a century old, that's pretty remarkable. And there aren't many manufacturers that would support a vintage tour at this level. That says a lot about Mercedes-Benz, and it was great to hang out with the mechanics and watch them work. I tried to stay out of their way as much as possible, but they knew I was on a mission to document all this, so it was really cool to have them take an interest and show me what they were doing. Now, day 3 took us north and east into Napa County, through long winding canyons and sweeping valleys. We had some confusion about the route, and there were a few wrong turns, and that caused the group to break up. And pretty soon we were off the tour book directions entirely, and we had to find another way toward our lunch stop. So we tucked in behind a black touring-bodied 1929 680S and a creamy white cycle-fendered 1929 710 SS Roadster. And Ebony and Ivory were off. They cut over to a twisty mountain road, and we began to climb. The inline 6-cylinder engines in these cars have tremendous torque, so you can imagine they were pulling like a pair of locomotives. And I honestly didn't expect them to do so well up the hill, especially since the S model's long wheelbase was sort of a detriment back in the 20s when they were doing the hill climbs. And I realized they weren't trying to win any races on this trip, but they were driving spiritedly, and even with solid axles, leaf springs, and friction shocks, the cars were cutting a swift line up the mountain. It was pretty impressive. Their steering appeared to be relatively neutral and well-balanced, and there was no drama. There was no wobble, there was no judder, nobody got squirrely. They just had a good, strong run up the hill under throttle, and it was really fun to chase them. Now, running down the other side of the mountain, the approach was a little more cautious, you can imagine, given the mechanical drum brakes and the skinny tires. One interesting detail, these cars have cast iron brake drums, but they are plated in copper for greater heat dissipation. They want to shed that heat, right? But it's likely that brake fade is still a concern on downhill runs for these cars. I mean, of course it is. They're 90 years old. So downshifting and engine braking become essential. And the gearbox in the W06 is not synchronized. And in fact, I think they're straight cut gears. So it demands full attention. Also, the brake lamps are tiny and tough to see in the full sun. So when you're following one, you really want to be careful. So I left the cars plenty of room, but we knew exactly when they were braking because they squeal like mad. You can hear them from 50 yards away. That mountain run was a great demonstration of the cars in action. It was probably the most dramatic display I'd seen up to that point in the trip. We had a few straightaway runs that, let's just say, exceeded the legal limit, and I won't go any farther than that, but in watching the W06s perform, I'd say they're somewhere in between a Bentley and an Alfa Romeo in terms of handling. They're less truck-like than a Bentley and probably a little less nimble than an 8C Alfa, let's say, but that's just a guess based on my observations. Anyway, off we went to lunch just outside the little town of Calistoga, this time at Clos Pegase Vineyards, where the meal was served in the depths of a 20,000 square foot wine cave, which is carved into the side of a small hill. And because of that, the barrels are kept at a constant 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So lunch was delicious, but by the time it was over, I was getting a little chilly down in the cave, so we were glad to get back in the sunshine and hit the road once again. And then it was back to the hotel for a shower and cocktails, and then everyone celebrated that evening at the final dinner of the trip. It was a great end to a special event, and I want to thank all the W06 owners for being so welcoming to us. They were curious about what we were doing and interested, and I know they were grateful for the awesome photography that Royce provided. You know, they're going to remember this trip for the rest of their lives, and it's nice to have a photographic record of that. Now, keep in mind, this is the first time ever that these historic Mercedes Benz W06 cars had toured the United States in a group. So you can imagine that with the expense and logistics required, it might be many years before that happens again. Also, I want to give a shout out to a gentleman named John Bentley, who sort of organized the tour on the ground here in the United States. Fantastic guy, and it was great to spend some time with him on the tour. So, John, thank you. And luckily, I also had the opportunity to interview two gentlemen who were critical in making the event such a success.
My name is Michael Kunz. I'm manager of the Mercedes Benz Classic Center USA.
My name is Marcus Pratchett. I'm an executive vice president of Mercedes Benz and the head of Mercedes Benz Heritage.
What were your impressions on the road today?
From my point of view, it was a perfect fit, perfect experience. You know, you drive a dream car, you are in a dream environment, Sonoma Valley with all these wonderful wine estates. The weather was gorgeous. We're driving all morning, all afternoon. The cars performed perfectly well. They were all open. And if you sit in a vehicle which is basically more than 90 years old and which was made all that ages before to be a piece of perfection and to last forever, there is two feelings you have. Absolute happiness and a deep feeling of modesty. And that's what I felt today.
Mike, what were your impressions of today?
Well, what amazed me, I would take a step back and I would say, you know, we had just a couple days prior, most of these cars on the lawn at Pebble Beach. And to be honest, you know, many times cars on the lawn at Pebble Beach are not fit to do a trip like this. And these cars left from Pebble Beach and showed how absolutely wonderful they are. And to add what Marcus said, the roads are incredible. And I always think, even for me, for being a local Californian, they're incredible. And I know for our guests that are not from the US, not from this area, they must have been extremely thrilled. And the cars performed flawlessly. They sounded great, they ran great. You get a lot of respect on the road with those cars too. People look at them and enjoy them, and it's a pleasure having them here.
Give us an idea how far and wide these cars had to travel from in order to get here.
Oh, there's everything from pretty close to the place in the Californian area, and from all the way from the farthest part of Europe. So basically, what we have here is, as to my knowledge, the biggest gathering of Mercedes compressors ever. So we have 22.
Of the 22 show cars, 19 made it.
Exactly. So around 20 of them here, and never ever something like this had happened. As Mike said, we had a wonderful lineup at Pebble Beach, all of them one after the other, and to Pebble Beach a lot of people come who know all and everything about stunning cars and are not that easy to impress. But there was nobody walking down that line which wouldn't have been impressed to the max, including myself.
For the uninitiated, what is a Mercedes-Benz compressor?
So basically you're talking about vehicles that are, when we say compressor, these are supercharged cars. It's a 6-cylinder supercharged car that came in various different chassis, or rather body configurations. Some more or less standard, but also coach-built bodies. So you have cars that were delivered as a chassis in the engine, and the body was built by someone else. In that family, you have the S, which is Super, and then you have an SS, Super Sport, SSK, which is Super Sport Short, and the rarest of all of them, a Super Sport Short Light SSKL. Quite a lineup, really the pinnacle of the brand in terms of what you could buy back in the day, way ahead of its time. Extremely powerful, cars that are capable of doing over 100 miles an hour, no problem, but quite amazing, and especially all the different configurations. It's quite cool to see all that.
It's an inline 6-cylinder machine, as Mike said, supercharged. And if you do the kick down, automatically the blower, the supercharger kicks in, and it sounds like a trumpet. It has a very specific sound, and this is why these cars were known as the elephants, because it sounded as really an elephant trumpeting and just storming forward. And it's an awesome experience. If you open the hood and you look at the engine, it has this Art Deco style architecture. It's not only engineered to the maximum perfection, it's also designed and styled in an Art Deco manner, which is a pleasure to look at. If it wouldn't be that expensive and if it wouldn't be a grime, you would simply rip one out and put it into your living room just to be able to look at it all the time. The driving experience is unmatched. You have this long hood in front of you, the three-pointed star on the very front, and that gives the whole thing kind of a majestic character.
Arguably, Mercedes Benz is the company that is most committed to supporting its heritage.
So the reason why heritage is so important to us, first of all, the evidence is we are the first and oldest car manufacturer in the world, as our two founding fathers, Gottlieb Daimler, Carl Benz, have invented the car. So we have 137 years of an unbroken chain of innovation. The heart and the soul of building a car is that you have a set of values, of beliefs, of a creed, how a piece of technology should be built. And this is not about how many cylinders it has and how the engine should look like. It's simply that in all the ages, the aim is, the strive is to build the best product using the best knowledge, the best material, and the best execution, so that you look ahead, that it will be still kind of matching all the requests for a long, long time. And you only can do that if you are grounded in a heritage set, which everybody in the company knows. That's the reason why we have taken all the parts which are relevant for that, the archives, the collection, the museum. We have a huge museum in Stuttgart, Germany, where we display 140 cars. We have another 1,200 in secret places, tucked away as the collection. We do events, all that stuff we put in a new organization which is called Mercedes Benz Heritage, and have made it part of the CEO's direct responsibility. Put one of our 5 executive vice presidents, which we have in charge of it, which is me, and that shows you what kind of major focus we have on that. So what's my job? My job is, first of all, to make clear to all of our people, the engineers, the accountants, the controllers, the operative manager, the people in production, in research development, what are really the values, and then to show them the product from the beginning until today, let them experience how it feels, and looking forward to give them, again, the ambition, the strive, the clear understanding that what you are doing is very relevant and has to last for a long, long time, especially now in a time where the transformation to electrical propulsion is absolutely on the go, and we are also very committed to that. So we will build, as we did with the combustion engines, the best electrical cars in the world. That's our aim. That has to be our understanding. And 50 years from now, 80 years from now, 137 years from now, people shall use them, these new cars, and look at them and say, wow, what those guys made at their time. That was breakthrough technology. That was beginning of something new. And that's why it's so important to remember that all the time.
Is it true that you will provide any part for any Mercedes-Benz ever built?
In theory, we could do that, yeah. And certainly as a brand with a vintage heritage, we are clearly the leaders in supporting the product. And what keeps the product going is the parts supply. It's a huge element to our business, right? So the availability of parts far exceeds any other brand. We didn't do it as a fashionable thing to do, as other brands are now perhaps trying to enter that market. We've always done it. We always thought, given the virtues of the brand, of its longevity, we needed to keep those cars going. Those cars are a rolling testament to the quality of the brand, the quality of the cars. So we essentially get free advertising by keeping the vintage cars going, and to do that, you need to have the parts. Parts supply is also enabled by a company that always has preserved the engineering drawings to produce the parts. So if the question is whether or not we can get any part for any car, yes, in theory, we could produce any part for any car. But in the end, there has to be, like anything today, there has to be a valid business case to do that. So we look at those things and say, okay, given the capacity that we have, what would it be? What do we produce, right? So by and large, it's an incredible business for us that is unequaled by anyone else. Would we, as a business, produce a part for someone, even if perhaps we're subletting some of it to another manufacturer? Yes, we would do that. And we've done that before. If we have a car that has a one-off part, and we have a rare car where the part is really not used in any other cars, we've taken the drawings and we've machined them, machined the part from those drawings. The drawings are incredibly detailed, very informative, and we've always been good about preserving them.
We have now a clear new setup in the company. So all the parts 12 to 15 years after end of production are managed by the heritage organization. It will not really pay back in cash, in dollars, but it pays big time for the brand. So we're going to do it because overall the parts business is a profitable one, sure enough.
What kind of support was provided for this tour in particular?
From a technical support perspective, the support at the event entails a series of technicians, 2 technicians from our classic operations in Germany, heritage operations, and then I have 2 technicians from my team as well. We come with a fully outfitted Sprinter that has basic wear parts in it, fluids, spark plugs, and things like that. The things that can typically go wrong, we carry on board. And those teams, they follow the pack of cars, and they will assist anything from changing the spark plugs to changing a tire off the rim without a tire machine on the side of a road to put a patch on a tube. We're here to do that. So the idea in the end is that people will always can carry on. They can continue, and we show our dedication to those customers so that they can have a great experience.
And we are basically used to that, not just here for this wonderful event. Every year, for example, we are participant in the Mille Miglia in Italy, which is not 1,000 miles, what Mille Miglia in Italian means. Nowadays, actually, it's 1,500 miles. And this time we entered a compressor, which I drove, and 2 gull wings, and had our technicians, our master mechanics there as well, and also supported customer teams with gull wings and also pre-war cars. And we kept them running. And the Mille is a tough one. So we are very proud if we finally bring all the cars over the finish line, and usually it works.
Talk about how important the American market is to Mercedes-Benz from the point of view of Mercedes-Benz Classic.
So the importance of the U.S. market really comes from the history of the brand in the United States, clearly. I don't know if it's any more the number one export market. It could be China, for that matter, in terms of new cars. But if you go back into the 1950s, post-war, the primary market was the United States. Cars like the 300 SL would have never occurred had it not been for the importer, Max Huffman, and his insistence that such a car could be successful in the United States. So it's a strong market. It's well known, the brand identity is absolute number one. And for us, it's an important market to care for and make sure the customers get what they need and they have the experience that we want them to have.
We have been one of the first producers in the US. A lot of people don't know that our partner originally in the US was a German immigrant who was very good in building wooden pieces. So at that time we delivered the chassis, the engine, across the ocean. And this guy with his fellows, he has built all the body around it. And he could do that very well because his day job was to produce wooden music instruments. And his name in German was Steinweg, in American was Steinway. So luxury meets luxury, and we are very proud of that. And that's a long, long history in this country.
That is an amazing piece of historical information. That puts it all into context, in a sense. We've gone 22 minutes, gentlemen. You've been very generous with your time. Just one more question. Who bought the Uhlenhaut coupe?
No comment.
What I can tell you, it wasn't me. I sold it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. If you like what you've heard, go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage and support the show. You can give as little as $2 or you can make it a larger amount. Also, don't forget, I will see you back here this Friday, September 22nd, with the founders of The Bridge, Shameen Abbas and Jeff Einhorn. We'll be talking about the history of one of America's most storied race circuits and how they created one of the top car events in North America. That's this Friday. Guys, thank you so much for listening and supporting the show. And until next time, I'm Maurice Merrick.